Welcome to a very special plenary that has been at least 15 years in the making. Every year at our conference, we always select one of our plenaries to focus on the civil justice remedies available to victims and the importance of that. And today we're delighted to have so many of the people that were such an important part of the film Spotlight, which helped tell our story and the story of the work that we've been doing on behalf of victims of clergy sexual abuse. And it's my pleasure to introduce our moderators for this morning's presentation. I also want to thank them for being the sponsors of this plenary, and that's Slade and McLaughlin and Paul Lauricella. And Slade and Paul both represent victims of clergy sexual abuse here in Philadelphia and have been leaders in that effort. Slade also was part of the trial team in one of the first World Trade Center lawsuits. So his connection with victims and fighting on behalf of victims goes back a long way. His partner, Paul, is also a former prosecutor, and together they've worked in conjunction with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office on some of their grand jury investigations and on some of their prosecutions of pedophile priests. And so here to make a presentation, I'd like to introduce Slade McLaughlin and Paul Lauricella.
As Jeff Dion in his very nice introduction said, I'm Slade McLaughlin. This is my partner, Paul Lauricella. We're lawyers here in the city of Philadelphia. We're going to lead a group discussion today, and we'll have some points to add, but the main participants are going to be people that I actually had the opportunity to meet last night, and I think you're going to find them to be a very interesting cast of characters. I'm next privileged to announce the appearance here today of Phil Saviano. Phil, if you can come on up and join us in the group. The name Phil Saviano first became known to clergy abuse victims around the world for his powerful portrayal in the Academy Award-winning film Spotlight. However, those of you, some of whom are in the audience, involved in SNAP, the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, have known of Phil's courage, compassion, and generous spirit for nearly 25 years. It was in late 1992 that he broke his silence about his childhood sexual assaults by the Worcester, Massachusetts diocese priest David Holly. In August of 2001, the Boston Globe's Spotlight investigation team called him in for what would become a historic meeting. Spotlight reporters remembers Phil's 4-hour presentation as a graduate-level seminar on the issue of Catholic clergy abuse. Phil established the New England chapter of SNAP. He ran SNAP's website for many years, and he served 2 terms on the SNAP Board of Directors. At its annual conference just last year, SNAP presented Phil with its Pioneer Award. Again, quick hand for Phil. Thank you. I'm going to start out the discussion, but before I do, as I sat here and watched the introductions, something sort of occurred to me. And, I'm getting up here and making a presentation to you, and some of the people are talking about what they do and what they've done in their jobs. But, we have 2 survivors up here. And, the courage it takes to get up here in front of 800 people and talk about not what your job is, not what you do, but talk about very personal things that nobody wants to think about, much less talk about, and to bare their souls to all of you, to give you some insights about what it's like, the feelings they've had, what their lives, how their lives have changed because of this. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And, I'm really, really impressed by people that are willing to share not just their grief and their anguish, but the steps they've taken to improve themselves. And again, I'd like to just give those survivors up here a hand to thank them for coming forth and doing what they're going to do.
question I have has to do with the way that movie ended, and afterwards. And I think, Sacha, the movie ends with the Boston Globe being flooded with phone calls, and I have to feel that that was rewarding for you and for you as well, Phil and Joe. Can you all tell us, how you felt about the result that the investigation got, and how, Phil, what it meant to you and what it meant for you in terms of validation and vindication?
Good morning. Well, the short answer to that is that it made my life crazy because, first of all, I was thrilled and I felt very vindicated after many, many years of trying to get the word out and trying to be, what I was always wanting news media to do was to go up another level. The Globe had done a really fantastic job of reporting on individual priest cases, like the Father Hanlon that Eric spoke about, or Porter, but they seemed very reluctant to go to the next level and say, well, what's going on with the bishops, and why is it that these priests are being moved around, and why aren't they being reported to civil authorities, and so on. So when the Globe finally dug into that and started exposing that, I just thought it was fantastic. I went public in December of 1992, so this was 9 years later that the Globe called me in for a meeting, and then the next year they started reporting. So it was a long time coming. But another part of my story is that I'm an AIDS patient. Well, I wasn't. I guess I'm still an AIDS patient, but in those days, in the 90s, I went through periods where I was very, very sick. And I finally got back on my feet in 2001, went off disability, and in January of 2002, just before the Globe started publishing, I had accepted a job, a copywriting job, and I was trying to reestablish my career. But I found that it was very, very hard to get any work done when I was being inundated with phone calls from news media around the world and survivors. And so it was really, it was a rush. It was a big challenge, but it was an unbelievable, really once-in-a-lifetime experience. I'm very lucky to have had it.
Thank you.
So I'm not only a victim, but for many, many years I was counseling or taking calls from survivors who were coming forward for the first time, telling me their stories before they told their wives or their families or whatever. And yes, it's true that many, many survivors do get tangled up in substance abuse issues, but it's not all of them. But I think that part of the reason why this happens is that many children are so traumatized by what they've gone through. Their memories are so painful to them. Their sense of self-doubt, their embarrassment, the need to keep this all a secret is really very challenging. And I think that they just sort of, when they're teenagers, they just sort of fall into it. They have a drink, they feel better, they have another drink the next day or whatever. And it's not like anybody is intentionally thinking, well, I'm just going to throw myself into drugs or alcohol so I don't have to remember this stuff. It just sort of, it's like a natural occurrence. And then by the time they're really into it, it's really hard to get out. And in many cases, it's not till survivors are in their, maybe 30s or 40s that the situation with the drugs or the alcohol gets so serious that they have to, they sort of bottom out, they go through recovery. And then all of a sudden, once their mind is clear and they've got some support in terms of therapy or the AA meetings or whatever, then they're finally in a position to deal with what happened to them when they were children. And that's another reason why it's so important to reform the statute of limitations laws, because it's so difficult for people to come to terms and want to take action before their 30s, 40s, some cases even 50s.
Let me just add one thing to that. To know one victim of sexual abuse is to know one victim of sexual abuse. Everybody is very, very different. I would resist any generalizations or stereotypical assumptions about victims who are abused. They're all very different. What we know is very clear, though, is that this changes everything in their lives. And it changes it regardless, in my experience, of how many times they were abused, what type of abuse they suffered. The damages from this are catastrophic and life-altering. We've talked about substance abuse, we've talked about criminality. Again, I would resist a lot of those assumptions. I think that there's one thing, though, that I've noticed in doing this for a long time, it's not scientific, is that you lose your ability in many cases to have what we think in life as the most important thing. The ability to have trusting, intimate, close relationships with others. Huge issues about trust. So you have people, for example, who are unemployed and in desperate financial circumstances, and then you have a whole group of people that I've represented who are very successful in their careers, who are self-employed, who want to be at the top, who never want to be dominated again by another predator, or really another human being. So we have to be careful about this. And every time I hear somebody who's been convicted of sexual abuse, well, you were once a victim, I kind of shudder and think that, well, is everybody going to think that because you were sexually abused, that means that you will go on and do it again? Well, let me tell you from personal experience, people do all kinds of things. Some of them even become lawyers representing sex abuse victims. So it's a broad, broad range of what happens to people.
You know, and with respect to that, what Phil, maybe you can address this. You've probably seen people who have recovered awards, and Eric, you can probably weigh in on this as well, in connection with personal injury lawsuits. I mean, you know, sometimes I wonder, as lawyers, are we doing anything that is really of consequence in pursuing these cases? Because all we can really do in the civil system is obtain monetary damages for a victim. Now, does the award of monetary damages, or even is it just the acknowledgement that that they've done something wrong enough? Does it do anything? Does it help change the trajectory of the victim?
Yeah, I think it does. First of all, one of the things that happens is that there's a reversal of the power dynamic. You know, suddenly the victim feels like he's being listened to, he's being believed, and there are consequences now to his abuser. I can't really, you know, I can't speak personally about financial rewards, because when I made the decision that I was going to file a civil suit, I wasn't looking for remuneration or anything. I was looking for the truth. And the situation with me was that I had discovered that the priest that had assaulted me in the 1960s in Massachusetts, turned out that he had a very long career, and he assaulted children in New Mexico in the 70s, and in Texas in the 80s, and in the early 90s he was attached to the Archdiocese of Denver, Colorado. And when I read that in the newspaper, I just thought, how is this possible? Because when I knew him very early in his career, his sexuality was completely out of control. He was very compulsive. He took a lot of chances in getting caught, and I thought, how is this possible? Nobody ever caught him in 25, 28 years. Nobody reported them to the police. So I engaged, I hired Eric basically to advise me, and he said, well, one way to get access to the truth is to file a lawsuit, then you can go through discovery. And of course what I found was that over those years there were 7 bishops in at least 3 states that knew he was a child molester. He had been caught many times, sent to these church-run treatment centers on 4 different treatment centers, 4 different occasions. So for me, the reward of going through that process was finding out what was really going on, not only with this priest, but within the church. And of course, once I found out, I was really angry about it. And then I wanted to tell everybody else, because I thought, well, if only people would know about this, then it would stop. People would put a stop to it. But in that sense, I was a little bit naive.
Does not the confidentiality and trying to keep your name secret sort of perpetuate the idea that you did something wrong?
Yes.
Because
yes,
why else would
definitely.
you want your name to be kept secret?
Yep.
I think it's very, very difficult for a survivor to come. You know, it's one thing to talk to a lawyer or to talk to a therapist, but to go public, right, have your name and the details of what you went through in a newspaper, having the, doing a TV interview, it can be very, very intimidating. And so I fully understand some survivors who want to get the story out there but don't want their name to be used. And there's great value in at least getting the name of the perpetrator out there. Because what happens very, very frequently is the name of the perpetrator comes out there, and another one of the victims says, oh, it happened to, he did it to somebody else. And then that encourages other victims to come forward. Right. Now, in my case, 1992 was really early in the game, and it was particularly intimidating for me to go public. I was sort of freed up to do it, though, because I was an AIDS patient, and earlier that year I had gone through just a siege with being very, very sick. And then I had a brief period where I sort of got myself back on my feet, and that's when I had the opportunity to go public. But I was very, my family didn't know that I had been abused. I was really anxious about how my hometown would react, that people would ridicule me. I had a lot of shame and embarrassment about it. And, but I thought, compared to what I've already gone through, my health was destroyed, my career was destroyed, I was single, I was lonely, my reputation was tattered. I said, well, how much harder can this be than what I've already gone through? And so that really, in many ways, AIDS freed me up to do something that I may not have otherwise had the courage to do. But I will say, in that very first article that the Boston Globe did, it was a very lengthy story, this ran on the front page. Steve Kirkjian did the report, and I asked him in that first article not to use my name. But the reason was because I was a publicist, and a lot of people in the news media knew me. And I think that a lot of people knew that I was gay and that I had AIDS as well. And I didn't want my name used because I thought if the church finds out that I'm a gay man with AIDS, they're going to use it against me. And that's going to intimidate other survivors from coming forward. So I said, let's get the story out there, see if we get any other victims coming forward. And then once we have a few other victims, then you can start using my name. And that's exactly what happened. There were 3 other victims in Massachusetts that came forward. And this was going on in other states as well. More victims were coming forward in New Mexico and Texas as well. So it's 2 ways to look at it, but I think the most important thing is whether you use your name or not, the most important thing is to get the name of the priest out there and get the story out there somehow.
So it's really interesting. The other thing going on is so-called mandated reporting laws, where if you work with children, a teacher, a doctor, and you suspect abuse, you have to report it to the state. I think since the 1970s, Connecticut has made church employees and priests so-called mandated reporters. Massachusetts didn't do it till 2002. The church lobbied against that as well. So I think it's a matter of awareness, but then there's that powerful lobby. Although I do think the deference to the church has eroded so much in recent decades that lobbying power is weakening.
Regarding mandated reporting in Massachusetts, I would like to say that we've tried to get that bill passed as early as 1997. In fact, that was one of the incentives for me to establish a New England chapter of SNAP, because it was a state rep that had filed legislation. For many, many years, teachers, physicians, and so on were mandated reporters, and this gentleman wanted to include the clergy. And so I thought, well, if we get some victims together, we can go to the State House and testify and help put this thing through. We went year after year, and it wasn't until after the Globe's reporting blew this whole issue wide open that the legislator would consider including clergy under mandated reporting. And if that bill had been passed earlier in 97, 98, 99, there would have been at least one little thing that they might have been able to hold cardinal law criminally liable for.
Right.
That's
true.
Do we have some people that would like to start us off with some questions? All right, we have someone back here. I see a hand, a young lady. Jeff? No? All right. No. We'll get to you, ma'am.
Hi. I wanted to first say that I want to be careful with the words courage and bravery, because I think the fact that victims survived these horrendous experiences where their power was taken away, where their safety was taken away, just surviving that is courageous and brave. And then the second thing is I wanted to ask if anyone had the opportunity to face their perpetrator and ask some of the questions that you might have had.
Very, very good question. If anyone didn't hear it, the questioner asked, have any of you survivors had the chance to actually face off your perpetrator and speak to them and confront them?
I didn't have a face-to-face meeting, but I had a series of letters between myself and Father Hawley from his prison cell in New Mexico.
Serious.
And I was, I had an issue with my case where I knew Holly in only his second assignment, and I was trying to find out what happened in his first assignment, why he was moved to my town. And I figured, well, by the way, he was given a prison sentence of 275 years, which I was very pleased about. But I thought, okay, he's in prison for the rest of his life. Maybe he'll communicate with me and tell me a bit of his history. And so I have 3 letters. He did not answer the questions that I was asking him, but I did get some insight into his personality. And this is a guy who felt that the reason he was in prison was because he mistakenly took bad advice from an inexperienced public defender. I didn't get the information I was looking for, but I did get quite enlightened about the nature of his personality.
Places, and although the Catholic Church and some of these large institutions, their power has waned, it's not gone. They still have very powerful allies. They still have very powerful lobbies. They still pump an awful lot of money into lobbying. So the one thing that changes the perspective of legislators is outrage. The outrage factor of the Sandusky case, the outrage factor of what's happening across the United States that's now being made public, and all of you folks can be an instrument and a tool to bring this stuff to the public. People like Sacha that have done their part, all of you do your part. It's great to call your legislatures, but get people outraged. Get your neighbors talking about it. Get your legislatures aware of what's going on, and eventually be in a position where they have to vote for what the people want. All right,
I just want to say one thing quickly. Elections are coming up in November, and if you have a local legislator who has voted against statute of limitations reform, maybe take that into consideration if you're deciding whether to keep him in office or replace him with somebody that has a more progressive outlook. So that's another way to approach this.
That's it, folks. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. Much appreciated.